It is a great pleasure today to present Theo Nash, who has been a sort of long-term friend who came for one of our cruise conferences, and we've known him ever since, and is at the point of completing his PhD and is going to speak to us today. I should have said at the University of Michigan. And he's going to speak to us today on regionalism in Mycenaean writing, comparing writing practices at Mycenae and Thebes. Please go ahead.
All right. Thank you all for being here, both physically and metaphysically. The people in the ceiling. And thank you, Pippa, for inviting me back. It's always very fun, very special to be here. So about 10 years ago, just over 10 years ago, November 2014, I took a uni trip to Greece, and I went to Mycenae for the first time. And pretty much ever since then, I have been enchanted and befuddled and confused and enthralled by it. And have spent far too much of my life now dedicated to trying to figure out what's going on there, why it's happening, why it's there, and sort of why it failed, but less so because that's a little bit too sad. We don't think about the collapse. A couple of years after that, as I was trying to figure out this problem, I was writing my MA thesis in New Zealand on Late Minoan II Knossos, which seemed to me sort of the wellspring of the entire palatial phenomenon, and started thinking about linear B and why people might start to adapt a writing system to their own use, why you would take one writing system and make it into another, why you would want to put your own language in writing. And as I was trying to find research on this, I couldn't. It didn't seem to exist. The only people who seemed to be trying to answer these questions were this new group at Cambridge called CRUISE. And I mean, really, ever since then, from sort of reaching out to contributors to the Herbs volume, asking for preprint publications, and coming here in 2019 to present at the CRUISE conference and being here today, that's really shaped my entire concept of how we think about ancient writing systems and how we think about the scripts in the ancient Aegean. So thank you to Pippa and Philip, who I think is in the ceiling, and all the scholars around them, Torsten and Rupert, and I'll stop naming names. So there's no sense of NVIDIA, but it really is very special to be invited here to share research that really wouldn't exist without the kind of things that have been happening here. Now that CRUISE's views and some things change, but they never really do. Okay, so when I was young and naive and I had finished my MA and was starting to think about writing a PhD, what I really wanted to do was do a global study of linear B paleography, because I thought that would sort of answer a lot of questions and seem like a very useful thing to do. As it turns out, you can't do that for your dissertation. It's way too much. And in the event, I have sort of bitten off a rather more dissertation-sized bite, focusing not on the major tablet deposits at Mycenae or at Knossos and at Pylos, but on what I have been calling, and I was thankful to find that Milena also called them, the minor deposits. I thought I had made that up for a while, and it sounded rather strange, but it into Thebes. So the minor tablet deposits at Thebes and Mycenae and Tiryns, especially, with sort of a nod to the tablets and what we can say upon Ya and Volos and Eklina. The last two, not much beyond we have them. Ios Vasilios, obviously another of these minor deposits, which one day will be published. But I do hope that the work that I do thinking about these other deposits and thinking about writing at other sites that isn't Knossos or Pylos, and many of the deposits fall into different chronological timeframes than those major deposits. Hopefully, this sort of thinking will help us be equipped to discuss what we actually get from Ios Vasilios, which is looking in many ways familiar, but also looks like it's going to be quite different from a lot of the other deposits. And it's always nice when someone says something which allows you to sort of turn it around. So Kevin Pluto wrote a dissertation on Mycenaean literacy, I guess 13, 14 years ago, and said that the remaining sites at which linear B texts have been found, i.e. everything that isn't Pylos and Knossos, either provide insufficient data on scribal integration or have not been subjected to rigorous analysis and identification of scribal hands. This isn't quite true. And the fact that it's not true is what allows me to do a lot of the work I'm going to do with Mycenaean and with Thebes. So I love these maps you can get from Liber. They are really beautiful. Give you a great sense of where tablets are, how they're distributed. So as always, Pylos is the star child. It's this sort of fairy tale excavation where Blagan goes into an olive grove and he sticks his shovel into the dirt and pulls out a linear B tablet just about immediately. It was a dark and rainy day, but the linear B tablets they came flying out of the earth. He found the Megaron in the same season. Then they had to refill all the trenches, replant the olive trees, and go off and fight a war. But they came back and they finished excavating it. And right, Pylos is the star child. It's on, you got pictures of it on everyone's fridge. It's in all the textbooks. Everyone loves to brag about this sort of textbook palace with its textbook deposits of linear B and its textbook archive. Knossos is more sort of the ugly stepchild, the first try at the baking that you might enjoy yourself, but you're not going to serve to friends. It was dug too long ago to be dug perfectly well. It was 1900. People had a sense of how archaeology was supposed to work, but Evans was also giving out money to work groups based on who hit Mycenaean levels or Minoan levels quickest, which is why the Romanists don't talk much about Knossos, because they went through it very, very quickly. The wager system, he called it. And so because these are the main deposits of tablets, these have dominated our discussion of how Mycenaean writing works, how the Mycenaean palaces work, and how we think about basically all aspects of Mycenaean administration. But there's a lot of difficulties, especially with Knossos, because of that early excavation. Understanding the relationship between the different tablet deposits is incredibly difficult. Understanding the chronology of the palace itself and its final destruction is sort of the original sin of this discipline. It's impossible. The questions are sort of intractable in some ways. You just kind of have to accept someone's argument and pretend that the people who don't exist. So there's a lot of difficulties involved in comparing Pylos with Knossos because it's a moving target. It's very hard to pin down, and it's very hard to say anything confidently about how these things are differing. And again, sometimes someone very smart says something that is very handy for you. So John Bennett in the New Documents says, the time is perhaps right, while bearing in mind the observations above about preservation factors, to explore whether perceived differences between administrative practices of the different centers, such as in livestock management, perfumed oil production, land tenure, or bronze working, between Pylos and Knossos, are due to archaeological factors or genuine differences of practice. If so, it is equally important to understand whether those differences in practice are products of cultural choice or regional ecology, or are historically contingent, reflecting Knossos' mostly 14th century, according to the majority view. Here we're pretending the people who disagree don't exist, versus Pylos' late 13th century BC contexts. So my dissertation is not actually about Pylos or Knossos, but what I want to do is use the minor deposits and the evidence that they offer, the richness of the archaeological record at some of these sites, and the security of the chronology of some of their tablets, to think about, to add more to the picture, right? To expand the picture from just two major palaces, to think more about, to double the geographical range and add significantly to the chronological range, and think about how writing practices evolve and develop at different sites in different and in similar ways. So for a views talk, one has to come up with a topic which is very visual, which was views is harder than cruise. That was easier. For linear B, which is sort of not the most ostentatious of reps. So I promised something particularly visual, and my eyeballs hurt from producing this slideshow. So if yours hurt from looking at it, I'm sorry, but not super sympathetic. So it doesn't get much more visual, I think, than paleography, thinking about how the signs are formed, looking at them and puzzling over them and figuring out what sign they are and why these differences matter. Paleography is an issue that everyone who works with the tablets is really familiar with, especially because this is our only way of identifying scribes. They never sign their work, or if they do, it's not in a helpful way. But it's also been won't say controversial, but a productive field for scholarship in the last sort of 5 to 10 years, as we, especially at Knossos, where we don't have good archaeological evidence to date the various deposits, people have turned to paleography and really tried to use that to distinguish between the different areas. And they often follow this basic narrative, which was sort of set down by Bennett once upon a time and might be basically right, but doesn't work nearly as well as they want it to, where you start with complex signs and they become simpler. And the more complex signs your signs are, the earlier you are, and the more simpler they are, more simpler. The simpler they are, the later you are. And there's been a lot of work here at Cambridge. Anna Judson, Esther Salgarella, both separately and together, have done a lot of really good work to show that these assumptions don't work, and you can't just use paleography to date deposits. But paleography is incredibly important, and I want to sort of suggest that there are ways we can do this better. And part of that is by integrating some of these other deposits, because here's our general summary of linear V chronology, neatly stolen and then added to from Judson's book. Because amidst all the sort of error bars and question marks, you'll notice that at Mycenae, we actually have pretty clear dates. The deposits aren't huge, and we'll talk about some of the issues, but what we have at Mycenae are 3 different stratigraphically datable horizons for linear V, which is unique. No other site has, I feel like I'm lying now, I'm not. This is the only place where we actually have stratigraphic evidence where we can point to a deposit and say this belongs in LH3A2, this belongs in 3B middle, and then a few tablets belong to the final destruction in 3B2, 3BC, whatever you want to call it. So Petz's house gives us the only securely dated linear V tablets from LH3A2, which is really quite early. The ivory houses from 3B1, and again, the Citadel. We'll talk more about Thebes later because there are bigger problems there, but it plays a separate role. So here's Mycenae, again, with our lovely Liebherr map. It is the type site for Mycenaean civilization. It's in the name. It goes back to Schliemann, and again, his fairy tale excavations of the shaft graves. You go to Athens, you can't escape all the gold in the museum. Now, a brilliant site, and a site that has an incredibly rich archaeological record. The only Mycenaean site that really has a record, even though you have to go from burial to habitation, from the very beginning of the Mycenaean phenomenon, with shaft grave, with grave circle B, all the way through to the very end. Huge archaeological wealth and a lot of really interesting ways to think about how how this site develops and how that shapes the rest of the Mycenaean world. Unfortunately, the palace was on top of a pretty bare rock, and this is a ravine. And in fact, even the Megaron, half of it has fallen into the ravine. Because Mycenae was Mycenae, they also parked a great big archaic temple right on top of this. So the palace itself is almost completely gone, and we have no tablets from the palace, unless you want to count the house of the columns back here, but that's 2. And we have really very few from even within the Citadel, just down here in the Citadel house on the west slope here. The bulk of our tablets come from Petz's house up here, the LH3A2 deposit, and the ivory houses, this sort of larger complex that was destroyed in LH3B middle. So the richness of that archaeological record and the relationship of these houses to the palace, and just how the path to complexity at Mycenae is a big part of my dissertation. It's not really what we're going to talk about today, because we'd be here till 8 o'clock and you all have places to be. But one thing I do want to say on that topic is that when we think about these tablets, when we think about Petz's house especially, Petz's house is built in late LH2, which means that we don't have any evidence for a palace in that period, and we certainly don't have a citadel. So when we think about the relationship between these houses to the palace, the one thing that these Liebherr plans don't do, and most archaeological plans don't do, is distinguish between the phases very well. So this shows you everything as you kind of see it on the ground today, or sort of as it's recovered. But we have to remember that when Petz's house was built, and even when it was destroyed in LH3A2, this all looked very different. And even the ivory houses destroyed in 3B middle. There was a citadel then, there was certainly a palace, but this entire western extension with the Lion Gate and the incorporation of the cult center into the citadel area had not happened yet when they were destroyed. So even in that there's a lot that happens in that last period of palatial society in 3B2. And a lot of how we think about Mycenae is really based on that very, very late period. It's important to remember that in these earlier periods, the palace itself looked different. So getting back to the tablets and the paleography, here's our plan of Petz's house. It's called a house, and it's a house in the sense that we use the word of Mycenae, which is kind of a house and kind of not a house. It's a multi-purpose complex. Ken Shelton has this handy multicolor guide for us. So we have areas of craft production. It's a pottery workshop, we think. Pretty good evidence to think that. There's storage areas, and then there are domestic areas. So it combines domestic use with craft production and with craft storage. So there's a lot going on, and whatever they're doing here and whatever their relationship to anyone else, they are using linear B to keep some records. Now, again, this is our earliest linear B from the mainland. Eklina can sort of pretend to be, but they came from a drain with no good stratigraphy. So, and they also only have one small tablet. So we'll put them aside for a minute. This is our best early deposit. It is certainly LH3A2. There is no doubt about it. We have too much palatial pottery here to have any doubt about the chronology, which makes this very early. It makes us our earliest mainland deposit to Knossos, which means that if we were just thinking chronologically, we would perhaps expect to find a lot of parallels with sign forms at Knossos. And in fact, we do. I want to stress that this is a very small deposit. There are 13 tablets, and none of them is in particularly good shape. They're all quite hard to read, and they're all fairly chewed up. But amidst all of that, we have a lot of sign forms that don't appear or are very rare elsewhere on the mainland. So this is probably, I would suggest that this is a function of chronology. The fact that we are closer in date to when Knossos is still going brings us closer paleographically to the tradition that we see at Knossos. This twisted saw, we have it twice on two different tablets. The editors want this to mean that they're both by the same scribe. I don't think the tablets are well preserved enough to say that, but there's at least one scribe who's doing his saw like this here. Nowhere else on the mainland do we have this form, but it's incredibly common at Knossos. I opened up Comic and found it on tablet 11, and it's all over the place. We also have this, I've called it radiant dough because it's got these sort of rays. It's often they're dots, and often it's just called dotted if people thinking about it enough to call it anything. This is attested twice at Pylos, once in hand 13, which is a complicated case that we'll talk about in a minute, and once in hand 25. And again, you open up Comic, you'll find it on tablet number 4. It's common at Knossos. And poo with feet right at the bottom of the legs. Again, common at Pylos, unattested elsewhere on the mainland. You often get the feet, they're often just a little bit higher on the legs, but you with the feet right at the bottom. So in a very small deposit, we have a lot of Knossian features. So if we just have these tablets without the archaeological context, we could argue back and forth about whether this means they should be early or not. But the fact is we do have the archaeological context and we do have the date. And I would suggest that this tells us something about what linear B looks like in 3A2. And it does actually look closer to what we have at Knossos. We should expect earlier linear B to look a little bit more Knossian. And I say Knossian just because that's where the forms are attested. It's not necessarily meant to mean that this is an earlier form or not, but often it might be. But this is a function of linear B chronology, and Petz's house in a very small deposit is just jumping with these examples. Okay, so there is also possibly 3A2 linear B from Pylos. those of you who don't believe in the early tablets can just sort of hop off the bus and we'll do a lap and pick you back up in a minute. So I've used Skelton's tables here from her 2010 article just because they're convenient. I don't agree with everything that she does there, and her sort of kenosos and linear A for her. There's a lot that's naive in her work, but she was also, I think, an undergrad when she did it, so we can probably forgive her. But in these tablets from Pylos that don't seem to belong with the main deposit, a lot of them, the hand 13 ones, were found in the Megaron. For a long time, they thought they fell from a balcony. The fact is the Megaron doesn't have a balcony for tablets to fall from. It's more likely, Jose Molina suggested this, that they were baked into the mud bricks that helped support the Megaron, and then when it collapsed, they fell back out. And again, like at Petz's house, in a very small deposit, we have a lot of sign forms that are much better paralleled at Knossos than on the mainland. So I think that these tablets are early. It's a little bit contentious right now, but in general, I think that the evidence from Mycenaean, where we know we have early tablets and we know what they look like, supports the idea that if we had earlier tablets from Pylos, they would probably look more like this. So, all right, the doubters can get back on the bus, and we can think about the ivory houses. So the ivory houses have a much larger linear B deposit than Petz's house. We have 57 tablets, and they're all much better preserved than the ones from Petz's house. 57 is still not many tablets in the greater scheme of things, but it is enough to say something about. Like Petz's house, it is both a house and not a house. It's 4 structures that were excavated separately and sometimes treated independently, but which seem to go together. The West House, which has a lot of evidence for domestic use, there's a kitchen, and the tablets up there deal with things like distributing bedding to women and their children. The House of the Oil Merchant, you can see down here the room with all the pithoi full of oil, which is why we call it the House of the Oil Merchant. House of the Shields and House of the Sphinxes. There's some debate about the exact order in which they're built, but it doesn't really matter because all the tablets come from when they're destroyed, and we're thinking about the very end of their use. West House seems to start in 3A1, or in the beginning of 3B, and be destroyed at in 3B middle. And again, our lovely Liebherr plan showing us one sad tablet up in the House of the Shields, 30 in Oil Merchant, a few more in Sphinxes, and in the West House. This is lent from there because that fits better on a slide. Here's a picture just because it's pretty. Go to Greece in the winter. It's lovely. You can see much better. There's no other tourists. And I think this was taken in January, and it's just, if you're coming from a cold weather place like Michigan or like Cambridge, then it doesn't feel that cold at all. So ivory houses. So the first thing to note about the ivory houses is that even though we're probably only about 50 years later than Petz's house, and we have many more tablets and many more signs, none of those distinctive forms with their Kenossian parallels are attested here. They're already gone, which is interesting. But what we do seem to have is a bit of a house style, maybe. And it's really hard to say just how widespread this is because we don't have any contemporary tablets from outside the ivory houses at Mycenaean, but within them, we have 3 different scribes and one unattributed, so one unknown scribe, who are using this raw with a doubled baseline. It is attested at Pylos once by hand 45 on a tablet where he does his raw normally the other times, but one time he just pulls this out, and unsurprisingly, it does appear at Knossos on an unattributed tablet. But again, in a much smaller deposit than either of those, we have many more examples at Mycenaean. So this, I think at least it could be a hyperlocal feature, it could be a local feature, but it seems to be a function of the scribes working in this building, working together. We know that they're interacting with the same people. Their tablets aren't moving. Each scribe is only writing. The tablets that each scribe has written have only been found in one house each. Just a really hard, I've never figured out a good way of saying that, but example, like 51 only has tablets found in the House of the Oil Merchant, 58A's tablets are only in the House of Sphinxes, hand 62s are only in the West House. So, but they are dealing with the same people, and they seem to have this shared sense that this is a handy way to write your raw. Hand 51 loves it so much that he starts doubling the baseline on his O. This seems to be a complete personal innovation. It's not attested anywhere else, and we only have him doing it once, but he seems to like it, which is important when we think about that traditional narrative of more complex to less complex. When we have these innovations, sometimes the scribes come up with bits that don't fit the narratives that we would like them to fit. We also have this fun sign, fui, fishy sign. So here's the drawing from Mycenaean Tablets 1, and when Bennett published it, he said that the sign has been identified here as the tree-like sign, which he would soon find out was Pu2, with an instance of the same elaboration as was seen on the Onc-like sign, Za. This sign also appears in Knossos, thus elaborated, so that's that little curly chevron he's talking about. However, the crossbars of the branches are so faint on the photograph that they might be illusions, these little things here. And it is possible the lower stem is doubled and somewhat splayed if the mark to the right of the clearly drawn line is not an erasure or an irregularity in the clay, but a line and part of the sign. We'll come back to that. There are more pictures. So Bennett thought it was Pu2, Mycenaean Tablets 1, Mycenaean Tablets 2. After the decipherment, he commits to it. When Olivier comes along 10 years later to do Mycenaean Tablets 4, he doesn't like it. The third sign is not Pu2. It could be I, but there are difficulties. The likeliest explanation is that it's a unique sign. Saccone, again, and this is her drawing, doesn't like it. She thinks it might be a no. No one else really seems to believe that, and it's fairly distinct from the actual no right next to it. Olivier and Milena, again, in Tithemy, think that it could be I, but there are difficulties. If not, it is a unique sign. And this transcription with the sign not identified is basically become standard. It's what you'll find on Domos and Liber, the big online corpora. But in the second edition of Tithemy, Milena has changed his mind and is willing to commit to a dotted I, though he still thinks there are difficulties. He's willing to accept the form because it is now paralleled in Thebes. And Sara Lopez, in her Sapienza dissertation from 2 years ago, printed the text without a dot under the I. I don't know if that's because she's more confident in it or just wasn't dotting her letters. So this is my own picture taken just through the glass at Mycenaean in Athens, and a drawing of what I can see there. So we can see the damage that's described, and we can see that little bit of a line there, which is what led Saccone to think it might be a no and made Olivier doubt it. Now, as I look at this photo, the damage doesn't go as far as that line, and I don't think there's any special reason to think that it's part of the sign, but you'd have to autopsy it to be 100% sure. But by and large, this looks like a fairly unobjectionable eye to me with this neat little curly Q. If you want to make a case against it, you can say that the same scribe does his hand 52, does his eyes perfectly normally on lines 1 and 8 of the same tablet. But we know that scribes do this. Sometimes they just come up with a more complicated sign because they want to. If you want to get poetic, we can say that he wrote a no with its own little S-shaped curl. And when he did the I next to it, he remembered that he could add a curl to that one too. I don't think we have to explain it though. He simply does it. So this I with an elaboration is paralleled twice on the mainland, once in the main archive at Pylos, hand 19, once among the possibly early tablets at Pylos from hand 91, class 4. And so now that I look at it, I think that's a no.
That's a no.
That's a no. Okay. Either I stole a picture of the wrong sign because I got excited, or that doesn't exist. I think it does exist. So let's just say that I got that wrong. So anyway, at least this one's right. That's a known parallel. This is the one. So for some reason, this one and possibly the real version of hand 91's I weren't enough to convince Milena, but this version from Thebes, from the Pelopidou excavations, was, And we also have this parallel from the nodules excavated earlier. This is a fun variant form that we'll talk a little bit more about later. So if we think broadly about and it's worth saying that I, with this elaboration, it is fairly common at Knossos. It's another variant well known there. So if we think about what we can say about the ivory houses, we have evidence for a local style and how they're doing their raw. We have evidence for innovation, and we have an isolated Cretan form, form that on its own, we would be inclined to think belongs a little bit earlier, but we have a known deposit, we have a known date, we can't move it around. We just have to accept that sometimes they pull out these isolated early Cnossian forms just whenever they want because they're somewhere in their toolbox. So if we go back to the paleographic queries that we started with, what changes or features may seem to reflect development through time? Cnossian parallels in the Petsus house material probably reflect chronological proximity. Cnossian parallels decrease from Petsus house to the ivory houses, which again makes the case for a chronological difference. An appearance of innovative forms and isolated Cnossian parallels in the ivory house deposits warn against simplistic narratives of simplification through time. And if we want to think about regional local features, what features or changes seem to reflect local styles or regional traditions? In the ivory houses, we have this possibly hyper-local preference among the community of practice of the scribes in the houses for this double baseline on their raw. We don't know how short-lived or extensive this is. We could find, if we had them in archive from Mycenaean, it could be that everyone's doing this. It could be that it's just this weird house style in the ivory houses. But it does seem to be a real local feature. All right, Thebes, city of dreams. Yeah, everyone kind of loves to hate Thebes. It has a lovely museum, and it has a lot of really good linear B tablets. Interpreting them is a bit of a nightmare, but they exist. They all come from rescue excavations within the city. So we've got our nice aerial view of the Academy on Hill, and we have our nice plan with its rather poetic 7 gates. There does seem to be a full circuit wall in LH3B. They seem to find bits of it whenever I think they have it. They definitely have it over here. I think they have bits of it like all around. But probably doesn't have 7 gates, but we can dream. The tablets, so you can kind of, in classic Greek style, you can spot these sort of vacant lots within the city, which have that lovely brown sign, which says archaeology, and then are overgrown with grass, and you can kind of see bits of stone sticking through it. But from them, we have linear B tablets. So 3 is the arsenal, 6 is Othos Pelopidou. So literally most of our tablets from Thebes come from below a road because they were putting in a new water pipe. Ceilings from down here near the gate, which is fun, and the Othos Epaminondas deposit over here. In case anyone is yearning for Thebes, here's the wall. It's not quite Tyrann's. So here is our general, here's our deposits and their chronology. The chronology is bad, but it seems to be getting better. Alenia Andriku has published a recent article in the synchronizing the destructions of Mycenaean palaces volume, where she has argued that both the Othos Pelopidou and Othos Epaminondas deposits belong with a much wider chronological horizon of the complete destruction of the citadel at the end of the late Bronze Age, which in a period she calls 3B too late, the final destruction of Thebes. So the same time span as the end of the Mycenaean palatial centers in the Peloponnese. It seems to be closer to the destruction of the Pylian palace and slightly later than Argive centers. The analysis of more ceramic materials from other plots in Thebes may confirm this suggestion. So this is what she has been able to come up with so far. So it looks like most of our tablets from Thebes are broadly contemporary with the tablets from Pylos. Mycenaean pottery, the sequence is incredible, but there are a lot of regional differences. And when you have a region where you don't have a lot of well-stratified deposits, it is tricky to establish synchronisms. But Andriku knows this material better than anyone else. And so for now, we're trusting her. And if she's wrong, then we can all be wrong together. or I could be wrong with her anyway. Others may disagree. So those two seem nicely datable. The arsenal is a problem. The original publication says 3A2. Nobody really seems to believe this. In 1994, they went back and they dug there and they found some tablets in what they considered to be a stratum contemporary with what they were. It's right next to Odos Pelopidou. They think these two tablets are strictly contemporary with the Odos Pelopidou deposit, the big one. But someone needs to restudy and publish the context properly. 3A2 seems tough. There's also overlap in names between these deposits, which again makes it tough, but we kind of put those tablets aside a little bit. And the nodules from Odos Idipodos, the pottery has never been published. So we just kind of have to say maybe 3B1 because that's what the initial reports say, and maybe not put too much stress on that. So distinctive forms at Thebes. Thinking about, so by and large, these are all from the Pelopidou and Epaminonda deposits. So something about Ra seems to invite local forms. At Thebes, they really love this form where they form this central element using a single stroke, and they have it facing to the left. Again, you don't get that at Pylos, except for hand 26, who does it, and you don't get it much at Knossos either. Mostly if you're doing the single stroke curve, it faces right, and that's a much more common form of Ra, or you do this in two elements. So this really is very distinctive across multiple hands. So hand 302 is from the arsenal, so maybe it starts early, or maybe the arsenal is late, but certainly hand 304, 305, 306, and 308 are all contemporary and doing this together absolutely consistently in all of their tablets. We also have something that is just kind of weird. There's no reason to twist. So we saw Sa, which was twisted at Mycenaean. So Sa and Ni can both be twisted going back to linear A. Putu is never twisted anywhere else. It's never twisted in linear A, and it's never twisted at Knossos in any of the early deposits. Hand 303, who doesn't twist his Sa or his Ni. So I'm not sure where he even got the idea. Well, I mean, I don't know. Maybe he took it from a inscribed stirrup jar. I don't know. We don't see it there either, but maybe there was. Those are where you find the weirdest paleography. See, he's found this somewhere or just dreamed it up. And again, this is one of those forms where if we found it in isolation, that sort of traditional view of, wow, this is complex and looks like it was drawn with ink and blah, 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 would make us think it's early, but it's just this weird guy doing a thing. And it couldn't be a different sign. The words it appears in are unambiguous. It needs to be Putu. Nowhere else. We also have hand 305 doing his me with an I with a nice little dot. We don't really get this at Pylos. We get variants of it where you get sort of two strokes, so you're kind of hinting at an I, but you don't really get that nice curl and dot. It's not even super common at Knossos. It's most common in linear A. So it's kind of a weird survival. And again, it's in as securely dated deposit as we get at Thebes. It's late. It's 3B2 late. So again, we just get these forms. We also have another one of these forms, the nodule W44, unattributed from the Odos Idipodos, so tentatively 3B1. We have this elaborated I, and what he's done is he's drawn out that central crossbar and used it to form the lower half of the elaboration. This is a weird form. The closest parallel I could find was in Hanya, using the excellent Siglaw database, where we have the central element coming up and the elaboration form below. So this is, I don't know if he was just writing in a hurry and it's an innovation, or he preserves a different tradition, but we do have this form that looks kind of linear A-ish. But again, it seems to be late. So we just have to put it in its box and say they can do this when they want to. This is interesting. So Ma and Mo are kind of similar signs. I think when I started learning linear B, I messed them up a lot because they're kind of mirror images of each other. Big curve with an interior element, and then you got this S curve here versus the big curve with what I like to think of as antlers. And the extra element can be elaborated in multiple ways, right? On Ma, you can have 2 lines at the end, you can have 1 line at the end, or you can not have a line at the end. On Mo, you can sort of really make the antlers impressive, however many points that buck would be. Or you can just do one line of elaboration, or you can have this very simple form. None of this changes how you would read the sign or how you would interpret it. It's purely up to you. Like it's a serif basically, right? Do you put a little tick on the top or not? It doesn't change anything. And so it's quite interesting that at Pylos, very, very few scribes use the 2-stroke elaboration. 3 scribes do it, 14% of the scribes who use it. 5% use the 1, and 81%, overwhelming, hundreds of signs. They're just moving on. At Thebes, however, 63% of the scribes who use it, including 2 arsenal scribes. So again, they could be earlier, they could not be. We can change the numbers if we don't. I don't think it matters too much. They like it. They like those extra elaborations. But here's the thing. I would think, and obviously I'm not a Mycenaean scribe, because I would think if you're going to elaborate one sign, you would probably also elaborate another. And yet, at Pylos, these hands who love to not elaborate their Ma love to add the strokes to their Mo. 60% on all three lines, 27% on just one, and only 2 scribes actually use the very simplified version of it. Meanwhile, at Thebes, that is the only form we have. So there's this sort of inverse correlation. There's I don't know, they only had so many strokes each day, and they decided where they were gonna allot them. And there's no reason for this that I can think of. It's just this seems to be the regional style. This is how they do it, and it's developed separately, and for whatever reason, it's gone one direction at Pylos and a completely different direction at Thebes. The other thing that we got at Thebes, and this is sign 65, of course, is part of why Thebes is such a headache for everyone, is the distribution of the undeciphered signs. And I have blindly trusted Anna Judson for all of this because she is brilliant and I trust her completely. And I really don't want to have to try and replicate her work. It seems pointless. So certainly the sign 65, reading it as you or whatever versus far is, I mean, those who know, and those who don't want to have to think about it. But we have these 3 signs, sign 56, sign 63, and sign 65, all of which are most common at Thebes on the mainland. And again, in a smaller deposit, a deposit in terms of tablets, about 1/3 of the size, and in terms of signs, even smaller than that. And then the deposit of Pylos, the sign 56, appears 15 times at Thebes against 3 at Pylos and 81 at Knossos, so that's fine. It's common there. At Pylos, we have 3 scribes, so you have more scribes in a much smaller pool using it at Thebes than we do at Pylos. Sign 63, interestingly, not a sign that we get at Knossos, and based on the size of the deposit, that's probably meaningful. It probably is invented later. Almost all of our examples come from Thebes, from 3 different scribes. At Pylos, we have enough to know that they knew that it existed and they could use it, but it doesn't seem to have caught on very well. And this U, sign 65, used as a syllabogram, more common at Thebes than at Pylos or Knossos, mostly down to 2 scribes, so it might be an element of personal choice in there. And obviously, all of these undeciphered signs are predominantly attested in 1 or 2 different words, often names, so the distribution is kind of dependent on what you're writing. But I do think that it's interesting, and certainly sign 56 especially, they could use it more at Pylos. They use the word where it appears, Sign 63 is mostly in a name in Thebes, so maybe it's mostly that, but there does seem to be something to this. There does seem to be a preference for these signs at Thebes that we don't see at Pylos in contemporary deposits. So if we think about our local traits, if you are a Theban scribe, you are probably doing your raw with this nice single incurve. You're probably doing your meh with two extra strokes and your mo with none. And you, if you have the chance, are probably using signs 56, 63, and 65. If you're hand 303, you're on acid and coming up with signs that kind of bother people who want to find linear A parallels. And if you're hand 305, you've either reinvented or just, I don't know, found an old linear A tablet and recopied this old sign. I mean, there's no reason to think why it comes down normally, but it is quite striking. Same with hand 44, who either sort of got lazy and just drew out this stroke, or again, was forming this in a way that he'd been taught that goes back this once. I mean, it's unfortunate that it's on a nodule. We only have 3 signs by this scribe. It'd be great to know what else he was doing. So overall synopsis for Thebes, chronological features. So if the arsenal tablets are 3A2, they do not reflect the same pattern seen at Mycenaean and possibly at Pylos. We don't have this abundance of Cnosian parallels in the arsenal material. So either we're wrong about 3A2 or we're wrong about the date of the arsenal material, and we'll figure that out one day. But as it is, we should not really use that as evidence one way or another. The lack of Cnosian forms in securely depleted deposits probably reflects the late date of the securely depleted deposits from Pithu and Epaminonda. Though I should say the lack of the frequency of Cnosian forms, right? Because we do have isolated Cnosian or even sort of linear A looking forms, which again warn against basing too much on a single sign. And our innovative Poo just really reminds us that we have to be careful about the narrative of simplification. But we have lots of regional features. What features or changes seem to reflect local styles or regional traditions. Again, we can define a distinctive regional style, defined in contrast with the broadly contemporary deposits at Pylos. Raw with a single stroke, left-facing curve, the meh with additional strokes, mo without, and the frequent use of these 3 undeciphered signs. So thinking about broad conclusions that we can take from both Thebes and Mycenae, features that seem to reflect development through time. Broadly, when we go earlier, we find more parallels with common variants in Knossos, and these disappear later, which would suggest that many of the paleographic differences between Knossos and Pylos are chronological. And the telling factor, this is important, seems to be the frequency of these parallels, right? In these LH3A2 deposits in Petz's house and possibly the early material from Pylos, they're everywhere. We can't, the isolated Cnosian variants cannot be taken for anything on their own. It's only when you have, and we don't have I don't think we have the numbers, and I don't have the statistical know-how to develop a test for whether a number of Cnosian parallels is meaningful. For now, we'll just sort of know it when we see it. And certainly we see it at Petz's house and at Pylos, and we don't see it anywhere else. And then regional local features. So what do local or regional styles look like in linear B? What does regionalism look like in Mycenaean writing? It's partially dependent on sign repertories and the signs that you prefer to use. So especially at Thebes, we have this preference for these 3 undeciphered signs that aren't used as much. Certainly at Pylos, we don't have enough from Mycenaean to say, but certainly Pylos, where we have a lot and it's contemporary, there's a clear distinction there. So they're not inventing new signs or using a different sign for the same sound value, like the historical epigraphic alphabets. No one is as insane as the Corinthians, thankfully, or if they are, we just can't read linear B. But what the regional styles seem to be based on are the popularity of sign variant, of a greater popularity of a sign value, which is attested but much rarer elsewhere, like our double baseline raw or our single curve, the Theban raw. The meh versus the mo. So it seems they're all relatively minor distinctions, but there do seem to be things that are based on the tradition that you learn to write in, especially at Thebes versus Pylos. So what can we do with this? What I would like to suggest is that we have a series of relatively conservative scribal traditions that all originate from a common model at Knossos. I would like to see writing coming from Knossos to each of these centers independently. There doesn't seem to be, we have lots of Knossian variants which arrive at different places, just as there doesn't seem to be a major bottleneck in terms of sign variants when we go from linear A to linear B, because it seems to be just the same scribes learning to write a new language with the same signs that they were always using. I don't think we have a major bottleneck when we move from Knossos to the mainland. I don't think we need to say that it comes to Mycenae or Thebes and is sort of, you get mainland linear B, and then that just diffuses. I think we can account for it all coming from Knossos. And part of why I like this, and you can all yell at me if you disagree, but I like this because it fits with the archaeology. The archaeology at Mycenae, at Thebes, at Pylos, at Tiryns, to sort of think about the palaces that we understand best. All the archaeology seems to suggest at each site that there are separate paths to complexity. The palaces form in different ways, the palaces look different, and they work in different ways. So I think so writing comes and is part of this picture of independent development within something like a peer polity interaction model. And I think so we also have interaction between these sites, right? We have this sign 63, which isn't attested at Knossos, but is attested at Pylos and at Thebes, which suggests that there is interaction between scribes, at least on the mainland, which is not at all surprising. But I think there's a certain sort of lateral pressure between these centers in order to keep the script mutually intelligible, right? No one is going crazy with their variants. And I think you can think about multiple explanations for this, but you can think about writing letters or trade between sites. The necessity of maintaining a sort of written tradition that everyone who sort of identifies as Mycenaean can share in and use, and no one is trying to sort of go their own way with it, which brings us back to our Tequade tablet, our tablet from Mycenae, recording a dispatch of something, maybe to Boeotian Thebes, maybe to a different place called Thebes, but we can pretend for now. Thank you.